Alright everybody, how we doing today? Time for something a little more intelligent than previous video, but I felt it needed to be talked about. Apparently another article from RT, last one for today, the Pentagon's new nuclear doctrine is scary as hell. The Pentagon is actively contemplating the use of nuclear weapons to win wars that need not be fought in the first place. As expected, opposition to the U.S. nuclear doctrine is almost non-existent in the mainstream media. It used to be the case that the idea of using nuclear weapons in a real-world conflict was such a taboo idea that no one was ever openly to contemplate it. We need only look back to the end of World War II to realize how catastrophic and harmful nuclear weapons can be on civilian populations. Yet we shouldn't have had the blueprint of Nagasaki and Hiroshima to know that the use of nuclear weapons will be a frightening and criminal act. They are deadly and unnecessary. End of story. You can all save me the cliched response, but they ended the war. Firstly, the use of nuclear weapons didn't end a war, it started one. The Cold War. This is the guy writing the article, by the by. Secondly, anyone who knows even a little bit of history knows that Japan was on the verge of defeat, but don't take my word for it. I wasn't there. But those who were typically made statements to the effect of that use of the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance to our war against Japan, the Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender. But I digress. The United States military has decided that the only chance it has of maintaining a stranglehold over its empire is to actively contemplate the scenarios and situations in which it should deploy the use of nuclear weapons. Now, to be fair, Hirohito wanted to surrender. The Japanese military did not. They wanted to keep fighting. Not only that, but in reality, we could have ended the wars differently. We could have just simply had to put... All we had to do was put boots on the ground. We didn't need to drop fucking nukes. I was like, oh, you can't put the boots on the ground, they would have stopped you. We already had several boots on the ground. But that's not the point. The point is that the Pentagon has created a new nuclear doctrine, which admittedly this article is yet to go in serious detail, but this shit could get rather frightening before too long. According to Pentagon's June Nuclear Operations or Joint Publication 372, which was unsurprisingly made private not long after its release, the U.S. believes that developing nuclear contingency plans sends an important signal to adversaries and enemies that the U.S. has the capability and willingness to employ nuclear weapons to defend itself and its allies and partners. Nuclear weapon capabilities constitute a vital element of national defense, the document states. Nuclear operations are those activities within the range of military operations to include different crisis response, strike assessment, and return to stability. The Pentagon apparently believes that it is necessary and prudent to pre-plan nuclear employment options for contingencies prior to a crisis, which includes a means to access the anticipated effectiveness of options prior to execution, as well as a means to assess the nature and extent of unintended consequences. Having executed an option, the U.S. military is unlikely to stop there. According to the document, planning and operations must not assume use in isolation, but must plan for strike integration into the overall scheme of fires. The document also states that there may be a requirement to strike additional targets in support of war termination or other strategic objectives. Commanders must maintain the capability to rapidly identify and strike previously unidentified or nearly emerging targets. Okay, so it looks like they are going about this a little more intelligently than you might think. But it still stands the fact that they're so very willing to make use of nuclear weapons. It's unacceptable. It's insane. I mean, do you not remember mutually assured destruction as a concept? You know, that's a thing. And besides, defending our allies and, you know, defending ourselves against our enemies. What enemies? Defense against who? Whenever you ask a warmonger in the government, or even someone who supports the warmongers, curiously, they lack the ability to answer that question. Who? And they might say Iran, but I actually happen to know a great deal about the Iranian situation, because I'm an internet journalist. I read articles all day. And I fact-check, and I find this information. It's widely available. We're more of a threat to Iran than Iran is to us. Get that through your thick head. Anyway, forget the Iran nuclear deal. Where's the U.S. nuclear deal? Where is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to stop global annihilation by nuclear holocaust by a former reality TV star billionaire? That was a good one. The spectrum of nuclear warfare may range from tactical application to document eerily confirms to limited regional use to global employment by friendly forces and or enemies. As the Military Times was astute to note, the new doctrine reflects a world in which the U.S. military is losing its technological edge over the other near-peer military rivals. Just to give you a hint, the list of near-peer military rivals does not include Iran. It includes two nuclear giants in particular who are beginning to put the U.S. military on the back foot, to the extent that the Pentagon has no choice but to release documents which call the employment of nuclear weapons essential to mission success. Well, who are these rivals, these nuclear giants? Can you give us specifics? The urge to deploy the use of nuclear weapons only makes sense if you live in a world in which you must always be prepared to win a war against every potential adversary. Americans amongst you reading this may be thinking, yeah, so what? But take it from the rest of us, who don't wake up every morning swearing allegiance to a flag that to many others represents death and destruction. That winning wars tends to be less of a focus when compared to other issues such as healthcare, housing, climate change, and the list goes on. Well, drop climate change and keep housing and healthcare, and I'll hear you there. Because I personally believe that climate change is something that is not human caused, nor can it be reversed. The fact that it exists at all cannot be in question. It definitely exists, but it's not our fault. It's just the Earth going through its natural cycle, as it has hundreds if thousands of times before. But, as to the Pledge of Allegiance, yeah. No, a lot of foreigners visit the United States and actually find it slightly creepy. And believe me, I totally understand. It is a little creepy, making a child swear allegiance to a nation before they're old enough to fully comprehend what that ultimately amounts to or what it all means. They're too young to fully understand the total implications of that loyalty to the United States. It's not something that should happen prior to high school. And it should be reversible anytime. So there you go. I agree. The Pledge of Allegiance is kind of... It's like, we're the only country in the world that even does that. So, I mean, it's a little creepy. I agree. But yeah, we've got so many other problems way worse than winning wars. I mean, what wars do we need to win? I think the best war out there is the war not fought, but generally speaking. Anyway... Perhaps if the U.S. gave up on the idea that it needs to fight wars in order to predict its survival in the first place, or predicate, it wouldn't need to contemplate such a catastrophic doctrine. Prosecuting wars on the basis also assumes that these wars are unavoidable and must be fought. In hindsight, did the wars of Vietnam, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, and co. really need to be fought? Will the wars the U.S. cooks up in the next few decades similarly and inescapably need to be fought? Not to mention that if we are being honest, the U.S. military has barely won a war since World War II anyway. Prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, every U.S. military unit in Europe was nuclear ready. Post-1991, this had supposedly all changed, however. A recently released and then amended document published by NATO affiliated body was finally admitted that we all suspected anyway that American nukes are being stored in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Approximately 150 in total. So we're storing nukes in other countries now. It's absurd. Just to summarize, the U.S. is the only nation to deploy nuclear weapons during battle. The Trump administration suspended its obligations under the Immediate Range Nuclear Forces, or INF Treaty, in February this year, and is releasing documents left, right, and center, which suggests that they are actively considering using nuclear weapons again. And yet, as I type this, the person who wrote this article, the top news item on the BBC, is an article entitled "Time Running Out for Missile Treaty, NATO Head," the focus of which is NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg calling on Russia to comply with the INF Treaty before the upcoming August deadline. Somehow the use of nuclear weapons is only scary or worthy of discussion if that discussion involves countries such as Russia and China. Just take the bombshell admission that the U.S. stores nuclear weapons in Turkey as an example. The U.S. saying is it will remove Ankara from its F-35 fighter jet program, but only because Turkey has purchased the advanced S-400 missile defense system from Moscow. The U.S. barely blinked as a failed coup in 2016 could have put advanced nuclear weapons in some very unsavory hands. Whoever pulls the trigger on this nuclear holocaust will ultimately fear the blame for what's to come. But in my estimation, history, what's remaining of it anyway, will recall the recklessness of the Trump administration and those administrations that served the American empire before it. Absolutely, and you know what? I believe that this country, the United States, should be more feared in a nuclear exchange than any other. Keep in mind we're the only country in the world that ever actually used any form of nuclear or atomic weapons. The only fucking one. And it's arguable that it was even necessary. Not only that, but the fact that we keep engaging in needless illegal wars, I mean, to the rest of the world, the United States probably looks very, very frightening. It looks like a very frightening place. You know, do you ever think about how we might look to the outside? Or how you might look to the other person you're talking to? Because I think we should take some time to seriously consider that every now and again. I am more afraid of the country I live in than any other in the world. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm sane in an insane world. Anyway.